So after we had brunch, we went off to vote. I didn't vote, but Masha did, and we were going to try to sneak me in to see the whole process. And it was at a music museum. Unfortunately, the museum was closed. I don't know if that's because it was Sunday or because it was voting day, but we got there, and with all of the Russian knowledge I knew, Masha basically said, like, don't say anything, just act cool. I got to witness all these people voting. The people were excited to be there and to be exercising their rights to vote. It was cool. It wasn't like it was made out to be, which was all a sham. Now, let's just dive into it a little bit because I've since talked to a whole bunch of people about the matter. Some people loved their country and Putin and that they were excited to do it. Other people were seeing it as political theater, that it doesn't really mean anything. In the West, the media has basically said it's all a sham, the votes aren't really counted correctly, and it's all ridiculous. From what I saw, and the people I talked to, and this is just my account, older people voted for Putin because they saw the fall of the Soviet Union and they saw what he made. Basically, he helped create this more united front of Russia, this new superpower that has a national stage. But because before they didn't really have this. After the fall of the Soviet Union, it was like this kind of crazy mess of who are we, what are we, and do we have footing to bargain for our own self-interests? And so Putin, for all of his faults and shortcomings, did get them back to this point. And so I think the older people remember that uncertainty and feel a more closer connection to what he's managed to do. Through corruption, through whatever, but he's gotten them back to a certain point. This election, which I'm told is very different than in the past, he wanted to get a huge voter turnout because all of the voting polls were saying that he was going to win in a landslide. And so you can win with 20% of the vote in a landslide, and it doesn't really mean very much at all, right? And if everybody thinks he's going to win anyway, why do you really go out and vote? Like, he's going to win. And so he wanted, I think, 70% of the people, of eligible voters, to come out and vote in order to show that, like, look, everybody here is voting and they want me, right? To show, like, massive support, actual support for him. And so what they did was they had balloons and live music and, like, really cheap, like, food, like bake sale kind of stuff. And it was like a big party at all of these voting places. And I guess it kind of worked because they had a big voter turnout. Not quite what he wanted, I don't think, but a big voter turnout and huge victory for him. Now again, the Western media has kind of shown that those numbers might not be accurate. From what I saw, I don't think they needed to be faked. Every time the rest of the world kind of clamps down on Russia, they feel a more unified sense of nationalism. Now, if you know me and my politics, I don't like nationalism, I don't like patriotism, I think it's kind of ugly, I think it makes you, I mean, the definition of it is we're better than everybody else. It's better to live here than other places, when maybe it's just different. Maybe it's just different, right? There are certainly places that you should feel grateful to live. And the freedoms you gain just by being lucky to be born in a certain place. Sure, that kind of patriotism, it's okay. But saying that you're better than other places, and we're number one, that's what happens when the rest of the world tries to control a place like Russia. A place like Russia, which is giant and has a lot of resources and a ton of people. And so every time Europe or America tries to do something that's like controls Russia, be it militaristically or socially or through sanctions or through now expelling diplomats, the people in the country feel a wider sense of patriotism that we need to fight back in order to get on equal footing. Like, why do they think they can control us? Now, you may be saying, well, Russia's doing all of these things that are really not okay. They're overstepping their bounds, they're, you know, poisoning people in the UK. And, well, that's probably true, and a problem. The answer, I don't think, is more sanctions and more restraints, because, well, if you think about it here in the US, if we heard that Russian media was saying that the US did something like, you know, bombed someplace in the Middle East that they shouldn't have, and there was civilian casualties, we would probably think, on the one hand, maybe that's true, and on the other hand, this is coming from Russia, it's just propaganda, right? And so flip it around, Russia hears that we're saying that they're doing all these bad things in Europe and here, and they say, like, of course they're saying that. They always say that. They always accuse us of doing something wrong. And so it's harder to get the facts when you're getting them from outside countries, right? From the media from America and Europe. And so it's really hard to tell what's really happening. And even if you could, you don't want to be the bad guy. So if the US government did something wrong, we don't want to take the blame for that. Specifically us, the people, right? And so the patriotism goes up every time this kind of thing happens. Now, I don't have the answers. Like, you can't just let a government like the Russian government just do whatever they want because we don't want to alienate the people who live there, but we don't want to alienate the people who live there, you know? We're making visas harder to get, we're making sanctions and the ruble less valuable, and making life there harder. And when you make life there harder, it makes the people feel more patriotic and want to fight back in order to get on equal footing. It's the same thing that kind of happens in North Korea, but on a wider scale, right? They just want to be equals, they want to have equal footing. And it's a hard conversation to have when the government is doing something wrong. And so if you take the governments out of that, you'll see that we're all the same, and the patriotism goes down, the hot-headedness goes down, and it's a really beautiful world. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about is the more specifics of the integrity of the elections. And so what I noticed was, well, in Russia there were 8 candidates for president, and of course, all of the polling said that Putin was going to win by a landslide and that, but it doesn't have to be that way, right? Somebody else could win, but the thing is, you have to get at least 50% of the vote to win. You have to have an actual majority. And if you don't, they go to a runoff. So that means out of the 8 candidates, let's say Putin got 49% of the vote, the next guy got like 20, and then the next one 10. The top 2 candidates would go into a runoff, and it would just be more like an American election, 1v1, right? And then they have to get 50% of the vote. They still have to get the majority of the people who vote. And that's how you win an election. That's it. That seems like the way to do it, and yet in America, and when I was explaining this to Russian people, they really didn't understand. They couldn't grasp the concept of, twice in my life, the person who did not get the most votes did win. So that's Al Gore, who got more votes than George W. Bush, and Hillary Clinton, who got more votes than Donald Trump. It's hard to grasp that as being fair, as the representative democracy that we are. So they have a true popular vote, and we have this representative democracy. It's really hard to have elections be free and honest, especially when the party in power gets to make the rules, right? And so just remember that when you're hearing other countries, Russia or anywhere else, having this kind of convoluted way to pick a leader, that maybe it's there in order to keep the separation between the party in power and the voting process. Maybe that's been mangled over years and decades, and maybe it's just because there's no real good way to do it. For us, I would say our integrity is better. The integrity of our elections are pretty good. They're very unbiased, I would say, or at least have been in the past. But for them, they have, you know, the true majority and a much higher voter turnout, and so perhaps it's a better representation of the voters. It's kind of interesting to think about. I don't have the answers, but definitely don't just believe these stories that say, like, all the Russian elections were rigged. That's not what I saw. I'm sure some of them were. I'm sure it's not exactly clean and fair everywhere. But from what I saw, I don't think they had to rig this election. I think the rest of the world clamping down on Russia made the patriotism go up enough, the love and support for Vladimir Putin to go up enough to not really need to do much at all other than raise the voter turnout and get people out, because they were going to vote for him either way, specifically older people. So that's what I saw about the elections. It was really interesting to learn about all this stuff and open my mind to realize that no election is really that perfect, and there might be a way in the future to make this happen, but we're doing the best we can, and so are they. And when it comes down to it, the governments do not speak for the people they represent. I know that it should be that way, and that's the idea, but I've never seen it really happening. I've never seen a person who feels 100% in line with the government and what they're doing, and that they represent them accurately. And so remember that. When the government here, be it local or federal, does something that you don't agree with, or they don't do something, the inaction is something you don't agree with, remember that the same is true in other countries, and the people there are generally very good and very kind and just like you.